Robert A. Heinlein's name was synonymous with science fiction back in the 50s and 60s, and arguably into the 70s and 80s, but his writing has fallen out of favor. Many consider his worldview outdated or stuck in traditional 50s Americana with the love of the Horatio Alger storyline of pulling yourself up from the bootstraps. But he is a fascinating person, and I thought it would be fun to pull out 10 little-known facts you may not know about Robert Heinlein. Who am I? I am Daisy Ex Machina, the detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Robert Anson Heinlein was born in Missouri in 1907. Like many early science fiction authors, he began publishing short stories starting in the late 30s and throughout the 40s, but he early embraced long-form fiction as well, with a series of books aimed at teenagers, specifically teenage boys, starting with Rocket Ship Galileo in 1947 and continuing to Have Spacesuit Will Travel in 1958. Interspersed, he did, of course, write several novels for adults, notably The Puppet Masters in 1951 and Methuselah's Children in 1958. Personally, I have a huge soft spot for Heinlein's work, mostly because of nostalgia, because I grew up on Heinlein's Juveniles, the books he wrote for teens, and was blown away with Stranger in a Strange Land in high school. But like I said, today his works are often considered dated. His ever-changing views on gays and bisexuals were complicated and not always positive, but then again, not always negative. And his views on women could be a whole video on its own. Hey, if you want me to do a video on Heinlein's view of women, let me know in the comments. And while you're there, give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Okay, I've been babbling long enough. Let's get started, and let's start with maybe the stupidest fact about Heinlein that you may not know.
Number 10.
Heinlein was a nudist. Are you shocked? I remember a friend of mine who lived in the same town as Heinlein in the 70s in California told me that Heinlein and his wife Ginny were considered oddballs, pretty reclusive, and that they walked around naked all the time and froze their garbage. Now, I couldn't find any corroboration on whether they froze their garbage or not, but honestly, if it's true, I don't think it's that weird. I mean, a lot of people do that with perishable garbage so it won't smell, especially in hot weather, but I wondered, was my friend on drugs when he told me that the Heinleins were nudists? They probably were on drugs, but anyway, I Googled around, and sure enough, there were a few references to Heinlein being a nudist, but there wasn't much about it because who cares? Who the heck cares? It's interesting, though, that several of his books, especially in the 60s and 70s, explore nudity, but
Number 9.
Heinlein came from a long line of warmongers. I kid. But his family did have a military tradition. Apparently, he could trace his ancestry back pretty far, and his family was in every American war going back to the War of Independence. His brother was a major general. Heinlein entered the Naval Academy in 1925, where he got a degree in engineering, and joined the Navy in 1929, where he eventually attained the rank of lieutenant. During World War II, he tried to join the Merchant Marines, but couldn't because of his health. His military family and his military service certainly, obviously, influenced his writing, which is very evident in Starship Troopers, which was published in 1959 with themes of duty and citizenship and military service.
Number 8.
Speaking of Starship Troopers, did you know Starship Troopers was rejected? This is kind of interesting to me because Heinlein's Juveniles, the books he wrote for teens, played a big role in solidifying my lifelong love of speculative fiction, and I never realized, and I bet maybe you didn't either, that Starship Troopers was meant to be one of Heinlein's juvenile science fiction books. Yes, Starship Troopers is a children's book. Scribner was the publisher of Heinlein Juveniles, and for the first time they rejected one of his books, Starship Troopers, and Heinlein was pissed. Very pissed. He wrote to his agent, "I feel that I was treated in a very shabby fashion, and I regard Scribner as in part responsible and do not wish to place any more of my stories with his firm. Scribner's had published 12 of my books, and every single one of them made a profit for them, and each one is still making money for them. At one time, Miss Daglish told me that my books had kept her department out of the red. So I offer a 13th book, and it is turned down with a brisk little note, which might as well have been a printed rejection slip, for it was just as cold and just as informative." So that ended the run of Heinlein's Juveniles, although many people, including me, considered a later book, Podkayne of Mars, as part of Heinlein's Juveniles or teen books, but that one obviously wasn't published with Scribner. And Heinlein didn't consider it in the juvenile collection, probably because it wasn't included with that Scribner series. Anyway, why did Scribner reject Starship Troopers? Have you read the book? It was way too over-the-top, violent, and pro-military, even apparently for the 1950s. But Starship Troopers was eventually published at another publisher, and it went on to win the Hugo. It has been criticized for its utopian vision of a military society, though you did catch that Heinlein had deep roots with the military, right? So, is it surprising he'd explore a military utopia? The book has been called fascist. Some even said there's a racist allegory, though the main character is Filipino, which was unusual for the time, so I'm not sure if that holds water. Several books from other authors are considered direct responses to Starship Troopers, including Harry Harrison's Bill the Galactic Hero and Joe Haldeman's Forever War. Though Heinlein told Haldeman that the Forever War, quote, may be the best future war story I've ever read, end quote. So sometimes you can't easily put Heinlein or anyone in a box. Now, you may have seen the movie Starship Troopers, but honestly, the movie is almost a parody of the book. And by the way, I loved the movie.
Number 7.
Heinlein lived in spaceships. Okay, going back to silly Heinlein facts, Heinlein loved embracing cutting-edge science and loved creating a home environment where he could live in isolation, someplace where he could just be himself in the nude. He designed his house in Colorado Springs in 1948, which was featured in Popular Mechanics in 1952. It wasn't a very large house, just over 1,000 square feet, but most of the furniture was built in. It had cork flooring and, of course, all the most modern gadgets. Is it just me, or does that oven look like a washing machine? But then after the huge success of Stranger in a Strange Land, which made him quite wealthy, he moved to California in a place called Bonnie Doon in Santa Cruz, where he designed and built a new house. Basically, this house was sort of built to look like a round spaceship, or at least a place where a spaceship could take off. In fact, it was affectionately called the landing pad. The Heinlein Society had some pictures of the interior of the house, including a painting on the wall of Lieutenant Uhura that looks like she's a pinup girl. I'd hang that on my wall, too. Oh, and apparently the Heinleins loved cats.
Number 6.
Heinlein influenced the English language. Did you know that Heinlein coined the term speculative fiction? Yes, I call myself the speculative detective and have Heinlein to thank, at least for the speculative part. It comes from an article he wrote in 1947 titled On Writing Speculative Fiction. Another contribution, though I don't think it's used as much as it used to be, but grok was a word he created for Stranger in a Strange Land, meant to mean to understand, empathize, to love, all rolled up into one. And yes, you can find the word in dictionaries. He also came up with the term Waldo, which is used to mean mechanical arms or hands controlled remotely. He popularized the phrases, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I bet you've even used that before. And also pay it forward, which I really like. Pay it forward means instead of expecting to be paid back for helping someone with a loan or giving them some type of help, instead you ask them to pay it forward to do something for someone else in the future who may need help.
Number 5.
Heinlein was the first to introduce science fiction to the mainstream media. Back in the 30s and 40s, science fiction was really considered trash writing relegated to the pulp magazines, and it was just really finding its feet as a genre. At that time, it was unheard of to think of any science fiction as serious literature. So it was a big deal that Heinlein was the first science fiction author to break into the mainstream, getting published in the Saturday Evening Post with his short story, The Green Hills of Earth. Whatever you think of Heinlein, you have to give him credit for paving the way for science fiction to be part of the mainstream.
Number 4.
He wrote the first science fiction bestseller, continuing on the themes of first and introducing science fiction to the general public. Stranger in a Strange Land was the very first science fiction novel to make the New York Times bestseller list, and it made Heinlein a household name. It was a sexy book promoting free love and living in communes, which was embraced by the countercultural movement in the 60s, including Charles Manson. It has sold millions of copies over the years, and in 2012, the Library of Congress named it one of the books that shaped America.
Number 3.
For number 3, we have to point out that Heinlein was one of the big 3. What does that mean? Back in the day, science fiction had the big 3, the 3 authors who dominated and shaped the genre. There was Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Robert Heinlein. Asimov may have been the most prolific, and Clarke may have been the best futurist, at least in predicting things like telecommunication satellites, but I think it could be argued that Heinlein was the most successful of the 3 writers at that time, because he was the one who broke into the mainstream and had the huge success of Stranger in a Strange Land.
Number 2.
Heinlein had health problems all his life. His military career was cut short because he was discharged from the Navy when he came down with tuberculosis in 1934. Oh, and during that time, when he was bedridden, he came up with the design for the modern waterbed. He had a botched hemorrhoid operation in the 40s, which prevented him from joining the Merchant Marines, and that was followed by multiple corrective surgeries over a multi-year period. But the biggest health crisis was in the early 70s when he was afflicted with peritonitis, which is an inflammation in the abdomen that can affect all the internal organs. He had an extremely rare blood type, which made getting the multiple blood transfusions he needed more difficult. In fact, he and his wife Jenny traveled across the country to organize blood drives. In the late 70s, he had a series of mini strokes, and then it was discovered he had a blocked artery and was one of the first patients to receive a bypass operation. Now, what's remarkable is that after a 7-year period when he just didn't or couldn't write, he began writing again. I remember how much of an event it was when Number of the Beast was published in 1980. Heinlein was back baby. He went on to publish 5 novels before his death in 1988 from emphysema and heart failure.
Number 1.
Heinlein holds the record for winning the most Hugos for novels. He won 4 Hugos during his lifetime: Double Star in 56, Starship Troopers in 60s, Stranger to Strangeland in 62, and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress in 67. He also has another 2 wins for Retro Hugos: Beyond the Horizon, published in 43, awarded in 2018, and Farmer in the Sky, published in 51 and awarded in 2001. So that's 6 Hugos for Best Novel. He also holds the record for most nominations, having been nominated 12 times. Oh, he also was the first to be awarded Grand Master of Science Fiction by the Science Fiction Writers of America. So there you have it, 10 facts you may not have known about Robert Heinlein. If you've never picked up a Heinlein book before, I would suggest approaching it like you would a classic movie from the 40s and 50s. It's just going to be dated, especially in terms of male-female relationships. I personally am slowly rereading the juvenile fiction, mostly out of nostalgia, but I think the storytelling holds up, and in my opinion, you can definitely tell why he was the most well-known and popular science fiction writer in his day. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.